Montana Territory, 1885. The land stretched like a golden tapestry across the foothills of the Bitterroot Mountains, the early summer grass bending beneath the weight of a thunderstorm brewing on the horizon. Matthew Vance stood at the edge of his modest ranch, watching dark clouds gather with a practiced wariness. At 26, he'd already learned that the frontier gave nothing freely, not land, not fortune, and certainly not love. The scars on his hands told the story of 5 hard years carving out his small piece of the territory, 5 years alone, exactly how he preferred it. His lean frame, hardened by countless hours in the saddle, tensed as lightning split the darkening sky. Matthew's handsome features remained impassive, his clean-shaven jaw set with determination as he surveyed his vulnerable herd. No room for softness out here, he muttered to himself, adjusting his worn Stetson. It was the mantra that had kept him alive since losing his family to frontier violence 3 years prior. A man survived out here by keeping to himself, by not letting anyone close enough to become a weakness. The West demanded strength, solitude, vigilance, all things Matthew had in abundance. What he wanted was simple: to build his ranch, to prove he could tame this wild corner of Montana, to survive. What he told himself he didn't need, couldn't afford, was the complication of human attachment. His belief ran bone deep. Love was a luxury for those in cities back east, not for men who battled the elements, rustlers, and wilderness daily. The frontier was no place for tender hearts. Yet sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep claimed him, an emptiness yawned inside his chest, vast as the Montana sky. These moments he pushed away with ruthless efficiency. Loneliness was just another enemy to overcome, like drought or winter. The first heavy raindrops began to fall as Matthew tightened the cinch on his horse's saddle. He needed to check on the eastern fence line before the storm hit full force. The gelding danced nervously beneath him, sensing the electrical charge in the air. "Easy, Scout," he murmured, patting the horse's neck. "Just a quick ride." He had barely cleared the first ridge when he saw it. A wagon listing dangerously to one side, where the trail crossed Cottonwood Creek. The normally placid stream had already begun to swell with the rainfall, water churning around the trapped wheels. A slight figure in a blue dress struggled with the reins of 2 panicked horses. Matthew's instincts warred within him. Strangers meant complications. Complications meant vulnerability. But he couldn't leave someone to the mercy of a flash flood, no matter how firmly he believed in keeping his distance. With a muttered curse, he spurred Scout forward down the muddy slope. As he approached, he could see it was a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, her golden hair escaping from beneath a sodden bonnet. Her face, though strained with effort, held a determined beauty that caught him off guard. "Need some help, miss?" he called over the intensifying downpour. She turned, relief washing over her features. "Oh, thank heavens." The wheels broken, and the creaks rising fast. "I'm Matthew Vance," he shouted above a crack of thunder. "You need to get out of there now. Creek floods dangerous quick in these parts." "Emma Daniels," she responded, gathering her skirts. "Everything I own is in this wagon." "Won't matter if you drown with it," Matthew said bluntly, extending his hand. "Come on." She hesitated only a moment before reaching for him. With a practiced motion, he swung her up behind him on the saddle. The feel of her arms wrapping around his waist sent an unexpected jolt through him, one he immediately suppressed. "My supplies," she began, but her words were cut short as a surge of water rocked the wagon. "We'll come back when the storm passes," Matthew said firmly. "Hold on tight." They'd barely made it halfway to his ranch when the skies truly opened. Rain came down in blinding sheets, turning the trail treacherous. Scout stumbled on the slick ground, and Matthew felt Emma's grip tighten. "Are you all right?" he called over his shoulder. "Just keep going," she shouted back. Lightning struck a nearby tree, sending splinters flying. Scout reared in terror, nearly unseating them both. As the horse came down, Matthew felt Emma slip sideways. He reached back instinctively, catching her before she could fall. "I can't," she gasped, her strength failing as the cold rain sapped her energy. Without hesitation, Matthew swung down from the saddle, lifted Emma into his arms, and began leading Scout by the reins. She weighed almost nothing against his chest, her body trembling with cold. To his surprise, she didn't protest being carried, instead tucking her head against his shoulder. "You're not just a cowboy," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. No common ranch hand would risk himself like this for a stranger. Something in her words, or perhaps the way her golden hair clung to her pale cheek, stirred an emotion Matthew had long buried. He pushed it aside with practiced ease and focused on the path ahead. "Don't read too much into it, Miss Daniels," he replied gruffly. "Just being neighborly." By the time they reached his cabin, both were drenched to the skin. Matthew set Emma down on the porch and quickly ushered her inside. The one-room structure was sparse but neat: a small stove, a narrow bed, a rough-hewn table with a single chair. "You can dry by the fire," he said, stoking the banked embers. "I need to see to my horse." When he returned, she had wrapped herself in the blanket from his bed and was standing by the stove, her dress spread nearby to dry. The golden glow of firelight illuminated her features: high cheekbones, determined chin, and eyes the color of summer sage. "Thank you," she said simply. "You saved my life out there." Matthew nodded uncomfortably. "Storm will pass by morning. I'll help you salvage what we can from your wagon then." "What brings you to these parts alone, Miss Daniels?" he asked, more to break the awkward silence than from genuine curiosity. Or so he told himself. Emma's expression clouded. "I'm heading to Helena. My uncle died and left me his mercantile there. Long journey for a woman alone." "I've been alone since my parents died of fever 2 years ago," she replied, a quiet dignity in her voice. "I've learned to manage." Something about her self-sufficiency struck a chord in Matthew. He'd assumed she was just another Eastern flower, ill-prepared for frontier life. But the calluses on her hands and the determined set of her jaw told a different story. "Still," he said, "Montana Territory's no place for a woman?" Emma challenged, her eyes flashing. "I ran my father's household for years before he passed. I kept our farm going afterward until the bank took it. I can handle myself, Mr. Vance." Matthew found himself fighting an unexpected smile. "I was going to say for anyone traveling alone. These parts can be dangerous." "So I've discovered," she conceded. "But I had little choice." As the storm raged outside, they talked into the night. Matthew learned that Emma was 20 years old, had grown up in Missouri, and possessed a surprising knowledge of business ledgers and inventory management. She spoke of her plans to expand her uncle's mercantile, to bring in goods that would appeal to the territory's growing female population. "Most stores stock only the necessities," she explained. "But women out here still want to feel like women sometimes." Despite his best efforts, Matthew found himself drawn to her determination, her practical intelligence. She wasn't fragile, despite her delicate appearance. There was steel beneath that golden exterior. Morning brought clearing skies and an awkward awareness between them. Matthew saddled Scout while Emma donned her now-dry blue dress. "We should check on your wagon," he said, avoiding her eyes. The creek had receded, but Emma's wagon hadn't fared well. One wheel was shattered beyond repair, and much of her cargo had been swept away or damaged by water. "Oh no," she whispered, surveying the wreckage. "Everything I had was invested in those supplies." Matthew watched the momentary despair cross her face before she visibly squared her shoulders. "I'll just have to start over in Helena," she said firmly. "I can still run the mercantile, even without the extra inventory." Her resilience stirred something in Matthew. Admiration, yes, but also a foreign desire to help, to protect. It unsettled him. "You can stay at my place until we get this fixed," he heard himself offering, surprised by his own words. "I've got spare lumber. Could fashion a new wheel in a few days." "I wouldn't want to impose." "It's not an imposition," he said quickly. "Just being a good neighbor." Emma studied him for a moment. "You don't strike me as someone who typically opens his home to strangers, Mr. Vance." Her perception made him uncomfortable. "You'd be surprised what skills a man picks up out here," he deflected, "including wagon repair." Over the next week, Matthew worked on repairing Emma's wagon while she insisted on earning her keep by cooking and mending his clothes. The routine they fell into felt strangely natural. He returning from ranch work to find a hot meal waiting, she asking intelligent questions about cattle management as they ate together. In the evenings, they sat on his porch watching the summer stars emerge. Matthew found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone, about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his journey west with his parents and younger sister, the raid that had taken his family while he was away hunting. "That's why you keep to yourself?" Emma observed softly one evening. You're afraid to lose someone again. Matthew stiffened. I keep to myself because that's what makes sense out here. People are liabilities. People are strength, she countered. In town, when someone's barn burns, the whole community raises another. When a mother dies in childbirth, other women take in her baby. Out here, connection isn't weakness, it's survival. Her words disturbed the careful walls he'd built. That's fine for others. Not for me. Emma fell silent, but her presence beside him felt like a challenge to everything he believed about frontier life. As the days passed, Matthew found himself inventing reasons why the wagon repair was taking longer than expected. The truth, that he was reluctant to see her go, was too dangerous to acknowledge. Their tentative peace was shattered on the 10th day when a rider approached the ranch. Matthew recognized him immediately. Peter Holloway, the local marshal from the nearest town. Matthew. Holloway greeted him grimly. Got word of trouble heading your way. Jamie Wilson escaped from custody in Missoula. Word is he's headed this direction. Matthew felt the blood drain from his face. Jamie Wilson had been the leader of the gang that killed his family, the only one captured alive. Matthew's testimony had sent him to prison 3 years earlier. He's been telling anyone who'll listen that he's coming for you. Holloway continued. Thought you should know. After the marshal left, Matthew found Emma waiting anxiously by the porch. Who is Jamie Wilson? She asked directly. Matthew's jaw tightened. No one you need to concern yourself with. But your wagon's ready. You should leave for Helena first thing tomorrow. Emma's eyes flashed. So you're just sending me away? Without explanation. This isn't your fight, Matthew said firmly. Wilson is dangerous, a killer. I won't have your blood on my hands. So this is about your guilt, not my safety, Emma challenged. You're still living by that same belief, that caring for someone makes you vulnerable. It's not a belief, it's a fact. Matthew snapped. Wilson killed my family to get to me, to punish me for a petty slight years before. Anyone connected to me is in danger. Emma stepped closer. Did you ever consider that having someone by your side makes you stronger, not weaker? This isn't some Eastern fairy tale, Matthew said harshly. Out here, people die. Connections get you killed. Connections give you something worth fighting for, Emma countered. That night, Matthew lay awake, torn between his growing feelings for Emma and his certainty that sending her away was the only way to keep her safe. By dawn, he'd made his decision. He found her already packing her salvage belongings into the repaired wagon. I'll escort you as far as Helena, he said stiffly. Make sure you arrive safely. Emma regarded him with those perceptive green eyes. And then you'll return to face Wilson alone. It's my fight, Matthew insisted. Has been for 3 years. They traveled in tense silence for most of the day. As they made camp that evening, Emma finally spoke. Tell me about your family, she said softly. Not how they died, but how they lived. The unexpected request broke through Matthew's defenses. He found himself describing his father's booming laugh, his mother's talent for growing flowers even in the harsh Montana soil, his little sister's habit of naming every animal on their homestead. They sound wonderful, Emma said when he finished. People worth remembering for how they lived, not just how they died. Sometimes remembering hurts too much, Matthew admitted. That's how you know it matters, she replied, reaching across to take his hand. The simple touch sent warmth spreading through his chest. Their journey continued for 3 more days. With each passing mile, Matthew felt himself drawing closer to Emma, even as Helena, and their inevitable parting, approached. Her quiet strength, her practical wisdom, her refusal to be cowed by frontier hardships, all of it challenged his conviction that love had no place in his life. On the 4th morning, they crested a hill and saw Helena spread before them, smoke rising from chimneys, buildings clustered along the main street. We're here, Emma said quietly. Matthew nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. They rode into town in silence, stopping before a modest storefront with Daniel's Mercantile painted on the window. An older woman emerged from the neighboring building. Are you Emma Daniels? She called. We've been expecting you for weeks. Your uncle's lawyer was about to declare you missing. I had some trouble on the trail, Emma explained, climbing down from the wagon. As the woman ushered Emma inside to discuss business matters, Matthew stood awkwardly by the wagon, knowing he should leave, but unable to make himself go. When Emma emerged an hour later, her expression was troubled. The store is in worse shape than I thought, she confessed. Uncle left debts I didn't know about. I'll need to sell immediately just to cover them. Matthew felt a surge of protectiveness. There must be another way. Emma shook her head. The lawyer showed me the ledgers. Even with all my plans, it would take months to turn a profit, and the creditors won't wait. She looked up at him with determined eyes. But I'll find something. I always do. Matthew opened his mouth to offer help, then closed it. What could he offer? His own ranch barely supported him. Besides, once Wilson arrived, Matthew might not survive the encounter. I should head back, he said instead. Wilson could be at my ranch already. Emma's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. So this is goodbye. It's for the best, Matthew said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He was halfway back to his ranch when the storm hit. A violent summer thunderstorm that turned the trail to mud within minutes. Matthew pressed on, determined to reach home before nightfall, before Wilson could catch him unawares. The first gunshot came without warning. Matthew's horse reared as bark exploded from a nearby tree. He dove from the saddle, rolling behind a boulder as a second shot rang out. Vance, a voice called through the downpour. 3 years I've waited for this. 3 years thinking about putting a bullet in you. Jamie Wilson. He'd been waiting along the trail. Matthew drew his revolver, trying to locate Wilson through the curtain of rain. A muzzle flash to his right gave away the position, and Matthew returned fire, hearing a yelp of pain. You got lucky, Wilson shouted. But I've still got 5 bullets with your name on them. The standoff continued as the storm intensified. Matthew was pinned down, unable to retreat without exposing himself. Wilson, despite being wounded, had the advantage of higher ground. A gunshot from an unexpected direction startled them both. Matthew glanced back to see a figure on horseback approaching through the rain, a figure in a blue dress. Emma, he shouted in horror. Get back. Wilson turned his attention to the newcomer, and Matthew seized the opportunity to break cover and tackle him. They rolled in the mud, wrestling for Wilson's gun. Matthew got the upper hand, knocking Wilson unconscious with the butt of his revolver. Emma reached them, her face pale but determined, a small derringer clutched in her hand. I couldn't let you face him alone, she said simply. How did you know? Matthew demanded, binding Wilson's hands with his belt. I followed you, she admitted. I couldn't just let you ride away. They brought Wilson back to Helena, where Marshal Holloway took him into custody. This time, Wilson would be sent to the territorial prison in Deer Lodge, far from Montana's eastern reaches. That evening, in a small room above the mercantile, Emma tended to Matthew's wounds, minor cuts and bruises from his fight with Wilson. You could have been killed, Matthew said, his voice rough with emotion. Following me was foolish. Facing him alone was foolish, Emma countered. We're stronger together. When will you accept that? When Wilson shot at you, Matthew's voice broke. In that moment, I realized you were right. I wasn't protecting myself by staying alone. I was just existing, not living. Emma's hand stilled on his arm. What are you saying, Matthew? I'm saying that losing my family nearly destroyed me. The thought of losing someone again terrified me so much that I convinced myself I was better off alone. He took her hand in his. But then you showed up in that storm, and somehow you became more important than my fear. Emma's eyes glistened with tears. And what does that mean for us? It means I don't want to leave Helena without you, Matthew said. But I have nothing to offer except a small ranch that barely turns a profit. Emma smiled through her tears. Actually, I might have a solution. The lawyer mentioned that my uncle owned not just the mercantile, but also the freight company that supplied it. The business isn't failing, it was just mismanaged. With your knowledge of the territory and my head for figures, you're suggesting a partnership? Matthew asked. To start with, Emma replied boldly, though I hope it might become more. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Matthew stood beside Emma before a small gathering of Helena's residents. The mercantile had been transformed under their joint management, expanded to include ranching supplies alongside the fabric and household goods Emma had insisted on stocking. Their freight business now ran regular routes to outlying homesteads. Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? The minister asked. Matthew looked at Emma, radiant in a cream-colored dress, her golden hair crowned with wildflowers. I do, he said firmly, marveling at how completely his life had changed since that stormy day by Cottonwood Creek. Later, as they danced at their modest wedding celebration, Emma leaned close. Do you remember what I whispered during that first storm? That you weren't just a cowboy? Matthew nodded, drawing her closer. I didn't understand then. But you do now? She asked. I do, he said softly. You saw in me what I couldn't see in myself, that I was capable of being more than just a lonely rancher, that I could be a partner, a husband. As winter settled over Montana territory, Matthew and Emma Vance built their life together. The mercantile thrived under their joint care, and they purchased land outside Helena where Matthew established a horse breeding operation. Their home, a sturdy two-story house halfway between town and the stables, became known for its warmth and hospitality. On cold evenings, they would sit before the fire, making plans and sharing dreams. Sometimes, when thunder rolled across the Montana sky, Matthew would remember that first storm, how carrying Emma through the downpour had ultimately carried him back to life, back to love. You were right, he would tell her, pulling her close. We're stronger together. Always have been. And Emma would smile, knowing that the man who once believed the frontier was no place for love had become living proof of its necessity. That in the wild heart of the American West, it wasn't solitude that ensured survival, but the courage to open one's heart despite the risks.